So we're gonna discuss about the definition of the Huangdi first. So why they named the Huangdi and the Qi bowl in the Huangdi Neijing dialogues. There is not much explanation is made, and there is all the guess through the ages. Some physicians say must be real Huangdi, or some physicians suggest that this is just unnecessary, that the person themselves is just made by as a heroes, as a titles of the heroes. So there's not much inadequate explanation about the in Neijing, why Neijing they used the Huangdi. But in the 2nd century BC, many texts actually they tended to use the Huangdi in their text. But it was a kind of the culture, putting someone heroes as a daily titles. But it suggests that it's not necessarily written by actually Huangdi, and it's the person themselves. It is someone actually as a hero. They put the name as the Huangdi. In Huangdi Neijing, what about the definition of the name? Again, there is no explanation. It's all the ancient physicians, they actually suggest their own understanding. The major 4 suggestions are made. The first one is Neijing. So Nei, the definition of the Nei, one of the definition is inside, inner, and interior. So one suggestion must be there is a Neijing, but then there must be Huangdi Weijing as a pair, but must be lost over the time. That is the one suggestion, first the suggestions. And the second suggestion is made by Yun Liu. He is the author of the Huangdi Neijing Suwen. So he suggests Nei. The definition of Nei in the Neijing, it actually refers to the 5 Jīng organs. Yep. And the third suggestion is made by Jīng. So he is the author of the Neijing. We're gonna talk about the Neijing later. So Jīng, he suggests he is the Nei means is a deep mysterious theory. Yeah, because in Chinese characters, the one character contains a lot of different meaning. So here Jīng says the name means something deep, mysterious theories in the Huangdi Neijing. The 4th suggestion is made of Fang Yiji. He is the author of the Tongya. Tongya is the books, explains the pronunciations and the correct terms of the ancient characters. So he suggests the Neijing, the Nei is used, the character Nei is used is because it talked about, discussed about the interior of the body. What about the Jing, the definition of the Jing? Now we translate the Jing into manual, Canon, or classic into English. But the earliest meaning of the Jing used to be wow in the etymology of the Chinese character, or woven fabrics, and also the ancient Chinese character they used the Jing as the major word. But one thing also, the Sima Chen, he used Jing in his Xu Jings. That means the classic of the time. So he used Jing in his title. It's not only Huangdi Neijing used the Jing in the title. We have other books using the Jing. So we have Nanjing, we have Shennon Jing, Shui Jing, and the Xin Jing, and the Cha Jing. As you know, Nanjing is one of the TCM classic books, the difficulty of the classics. Xianglong Ban Chao Jing is about the herbs. Shui Jing is about the water, irrigation, not irrigation, the water, river, the kind of the maps of the China. Xin Jing is of the astronomy, and the Cha Jing is the classic of the tea. So any classical text has the Jing in the title. They tend to have 81 chapters, because the definition of the 81 chapters, because it's 9 by 9 is 81. The 9 is infinite numbers in China, the ultimate number. So they use the Jing in their title. That means they have 81 chapters. And it is not inadequate to just translate the Jing as a manual, but any text with the Jing that tended to offer very fundamentals and important theories should be carried for a long time. Then Su Wen. Now with Su Wen we translate into English as basic questions. So in Su Wen, the definition of the Su, so it's a bun. It's the bun in Chinese is the origin, original, and the basis, basics. And the question is inquiring into the deposition of the man. But that is the basic questions, is the first suggestion of the Su Wen. But in the ancient time, someone used the Su, then it is undyed silk. Because ancient time, the books written on the silk, not on the paper. They didn't have a paper in ancient time. They wrote down all the important books on the silk. So Su Wen, another suggestion of the Su Wen is a question raised by the Huangdi and that were written on undyed silk. Now we are back to Wang Bing, because it's a very controversy about the Wang Bing's and his rearrangement of some of the chapters in the Huangdi Neijing. So Wang Bing, he put the comments in 38 different books, and in Huangdi Neijing, he put 224 quotes in the Su Wen chapters and 134 quotes in the Ling Shu. The biggest job he actually made in the Huangdi Neijing, in the Su Wen, is he discourses 66 to 74 chapters. We call the 7 chapters basically, but it's 9 chapters. But we assumes he inserted later the 7-9 chapters in original Huangdi Neijing. We call the 7 chapters as 7 comprehensive discourses in Pinyin Qi Da Lun. All the 7 chapters contains about the 5 heavenly periods and the 6 environmental qi. It is about the Yun Liu Qi theory. Yun Liu Qi theory is about predicting weather changes, climate changes. According to climate and the weather changes, then they predict the disease outbreaks, and especially epidemic disease outbreaks and the contagious disease outbreak. In China, in the 11th century, and one of the government office is called the Imperial Editorial Office. They rearranged and edited, but they didn't put much comments. Their books, when they edit, they didn't change anything about the Wang Bing's jobs and the edition in the Huangdi Neijing. They based Wang Bing's versions, the edition of Huangdi Neijing. That means that there must be a meaning behind. Because people think Wang Bing put the 7 chapters totally unrelated to Huangdi Neijing Su Wen chapters. But some physicians also say no, that 7 chapters are supposed to be there, but over the time the contents must be lost, maybe by fire, flooding, damaging, or worse. But this is what I think. So that's the reason I'm showing some of the chapters in the early chapters that contains only Qi terms. So there must be the 7 chapters, only chapter is not just a totally strange new content added by Wang Bing. Wang Bing must sort. Hang on, so 1 chapter, early chapters contain this theory. That means there must be more details later, but we missed that part, so he might put only 2 chapters later. So here, so when chapter 9, it talks about some of the only terms. So let's have a look at this conversation between Huangdi and the Qi. So Huangdi asks, the beginning of the 5 period, this resembles a ring without end. When their qi is greatly excessive, which is called the taigua, or inadequate, buji. How is that? Chibo said the 5 qi takes their positions one after another. Each of them has a qi that it dominates. The changes between period abundance and the depletion. This is their regularity. So in English books, now we're reading in the Huangdi Neijing, for Huangdi Neijing, it is translated greatly excessive, but original text has a taigua and inadequate as a buji. So the years, 5 periods, you already talk about the u'un, that it resembles a ring without the end. So when there is a 5 period comes, and as a group it continuously comes, but some years it comes as a taigua, as excessively, and some years it comes as deficient, but here we translate as inadequate. So another conversation about between Huangdi and the Qi. Huangdi asks, what is a balanced qi? In the original text, it is the ping qi. So Qi say one that is not excessive, and Huangdi asks greatly excessive and inadequate. What does that mean? Qi said this is outlined in the classic. So Huangdi basically asks about the ping qi. So we just previous slide we discussed about the taigua, excessive and inadequate buji. And then Huangdi asked about the ping qi. He asked, what is the ping qi? And Qi said it is something not excessive. Huangdi asked what is a taigua and inadequate. That Qi said it's in the classics. So he's not really explaining. He suggests to read another books to read. So inadequate and great excessive in the 5 period is the terms we use. So we're gonna discuss this in the week 2, 3, and 4, 5. So another conversation between Huangdi and Qi. Huangdi said, how does one know whether a qi dominates? And Qi said, search for their arrival. Always trace them to the beginning of the spring. When a qi is not yet expected to arrive, but arrives, this is called greatly excessive. As a result, it strikes against that which it under normal condition does not dominate, and it harasses that which it normally simply dominates. This is called qi and coercion, sheng qi. When a qi is expected to arrive but fail to arrive, this is called inadequate. So Huangdi asked King about the qi dominations, and the Qi talked about the taigua is greatly excessive and inadequate. And the great excessive year, the weather tended to come earlier than we expected. Inadequate, the weather arrives later than we expected. And he also talked about the shang-qi. The shang-qi is over-counting qi, but we discuss about this later because the shang-qi is not coming all the time. There is a certain pattern to calculate the shang-qi. So Jing is reclassified Huangdi Neijing. It's written by Zhang Jiebin. So Zhang Jiebin, his name Zhi is Huiqing, his Hao is Jing. So we call him Zhang Jiebin, but also we called Zhang Jing. But he also has a second Hao, is the Tong Yi Zhi. So there must be a reason why he reclassified Huangdi Neijing. I'm not sure how many of you have read Huangdi Neijing. But if you read Huangdi Neijing, what you will find is kind of a little bit chaos. It contains a lot of information, so much information. But it's sometimes in one chapter discuss about the pulse diagnosis, but then another chapter also talked about the pulse diagnosis. And sometimes they actually contains different informations. So it'll be easy, like one chapter totally about the Yangsheng, it'll be so much easier to understand and absorb all the information. One chapter totally about the pulse diagnosis, one chapter totally about the Zhang theory. But through 162 chapters in the Suwen and Lingshu, all the information is split. So I think Jing also maybe thought the same. Then he rearranged, reclassified all the content of the Suwen and the Lingshu. So the first chapter of his Jing has nourishment of life. So talked about Yangsheng, and he made one chapter for the yin yang, and another chapter for the conditions of the deeper, the Zhangfu, and the four organs, and the pulse and the complexions, and the conduit and the network vessels, and the tips and the root, bone, Biao theory, and the qi and the flavor, and therapies, illness, needling, 5 period 60 Yun Liu Qi, and the summary of the different views. Also, he published another 2 books called Jing 2yi and Jing 4yi. So to support, to understand the Jing, Huangdi Neijing, he made a lot of charts and the figures, and he put in those chart figures and all the photos, graphics in the 2yi and the 4yi.